Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again. And this is going to be a really interesting, powerful one, somewhat even scary. And if you listen to the podcast, gosh, it was a couple months ago, but we had Orca on. It was a fascinating podcast. And Edie, who's with us here today, had sent me an email about some of the trawling. We touched on it at the very end of that prior podcast, and now this is coming to light again. And there's even a chance this could pass and is not just a fisherman or an angler, but just anyone who is concerned about our ecosystems and our environments and just fish and coral. Like, we should be pretty ticked off at the thought of this even happening. There's been states like Florida, like North Carolina, even dealing with it now, who have basically have eyewitnesses, and we're going to get to talk to one here, Grant, who have seen what trawling has done to these ecosystems. And now we're talking about bringing it back, which it's almost head scratching. So we got Justin, we got Grant. Edie, I'll let you kind of kick it off and talk about this problem. How did we get here? What the heck is going on? And then we're going to talk about what happens if this does somehow pass, and then hopefully with some solutions on how we can prevent this. So it is all yours.
We've had a lot of information lately about how the oceans are deteriorating and there's so much loss of habitat. And there's actually the United Nations Oceans Conference going on right now in Lisbon, 20 nations coming together to try to deal with some of the things that are impacting the ocean. And a huge portion of that is focused on establishing strings of marine protected areas. It's been shown again and again how important that is. Coral reefs are the rainforests of the ocean. They're just huge sources of biodiversity. If some ship runs aground on a coral reef, it's a catastrophic occurrence and gets all kinds of press. But that kind of thing is going on all the time in the deep sea. What people don't realize is the deep sea has some of the most gorgeous coral reefs you can ever imagine. I've just seen amazing deep sea corals, rosy pink bubblegum coral and lacy upside down witches' hats of sponges and pink and white mushrooms that covering the bottom. I mean, these are just amazing places that are rich with animal life. And we have one of these, a totally unique one, right out of the Fort Pierce Inlet, called the Oculina Reef. And this is an ivory coral that's not known to occur anywhere else in the world. And it extends 130 miles along the eastern seaboard of Florida. And when it was first discovered in the mid 1970s and 80s, it was just astonishing the amount of life there. But like what's happening around the world to many of these deep sea corals, deep sea trawlers come in. And these are bottom trawlers that want to catch the bottom shrimp and the bottom fish that normally live in amongst the coral, but they can't get their nets down there. So what they do is they start out by creating what they call a goat trail, where they drag these weights and rollers and doors across the bottom without even a net attached, just to make rubble, just to clear out the Garden of Eden and make a path. And then each time they go down, they widen that path. And that allows them to get the deep sea bottom fish and bottom shrimp. And what's going on here in Florida for the Oculina Reef is the rock shrimp fishery has been campaigning to reduce the restrictions on fishing out there. So because of discovering that reef as early as it was discovered by people like Grant Gilmore, who's here with us today, we actually have images of before. So often we're just telling people, all we find there now is rubble. It looks like a moonscape. And I'm just talking about what I know it should look like based on other places I've been. But this is a case where we've got the before and after. And what's amazing about this place, it was the first marine protected area for deep sea coral ever established. And now the NOAA Marine Fisheries is talking about rolling back those protections for one small fishery, the rock shrimp fishery, at the expense of all the other fin fisheries and other habitat demanding species that are just being obliterated because of it. And so Grant can describe what that reef looked like when he first saw it, and just the amazing fish that were everywhere on that reef. And obviously we're feeding the fisheries all around in the Indian River Lagoon as well as offshore. Take it away, Grant.
Well, it goes back some time, almost 50 years, 45, I guess. We had a submarine, and I worked for Harbor Branch. And this submarine had a plexiglass sphere where you could sit in it with the sub-pilot and look out. And so when we looked at this reef, you could see it all around us. And this coral, by the way, is white, and it's very brittle. I mean, you can break it in your hands, so you want to protect it. But there are mounds of that coral, and their mounds extend tens of feet up, well, 70 feet in some places up above your submarine. Now, the cool thing for me, because I'm a fish biologist, is this reef was just covered with fish of all species, and very rich, like Edie was describing. But some of the most important fishes on that reef for our fisheries were groupers. It's a very well-known fishery. Groupers are served in restaurants all around Florida. And groupers were actually spawning on this reef. You had large aggregations all around the submarine. You could look out and see these fish milling about. Groupers, by the way, change sex and have harems, and all these things were happening right in front of us. There were color changes, behaviors by the males that you didn't see in the females, and we actually published on some of this a little bit later. Now imagine you're sitting in this plexiglass sphere where you can see out all around, but the groupers can see you. And there was this one grouper that we always ran into out there, a Warsaw grouper. It was about 500 pounds and 6 feet in length. Now, the sphere is about 5 feet in diameter. So this fish is bigger than we are. And he's looking in at us as if we're in a fishbowl. And he would meet us when we go out there and dive. And we dove for 5 years out there, about 70, 80 dives. We'd sit on the bottom, film all this. And all this was used along with John Reed's work with corals to help preserve this with the council's approval, the Fishery Council's approval, and NOAA 35 years ago. Now, we know that this is a vital place for grouper spawning. We documented that. And we also documented other reefs nearby that were trawled down by these strip trawls that Edie was describing. And so we knew the strip trawls would destroy this reef, so they had to be protected. And so they were for several decades now. Now this year, for some reason or another, the council has approved trawling again into this preserve. And I don't understand this, because we know coral reefs, everyone knows coral reefs are extremely valuable for the biodiversity of the ocean, as Edie just described, but also for supporting our fisheries. Do you want a grouper snapper fishery in the future?
Yes.
You want viable fisheries? Do you want the fish to spawn? And we actually watched these fish. We're sitting there, the sun went down, but we could still see. All the fish rushed to the surface, it's 300 feet above our heads, released millions of eggs into this strong Gulf Stream current. And that's how we get our fisheries. That's how they come back to us, is they have to spawn. Okay, now take out their spawning site, their spawning habitat. What's going to happen to your fishery? It doesn't make any sense at all. So we've tried to get people to understand this, and also to sign on for the protection of these reefs on into the future. And I hope that happens.
So back on April 29th, NOAA Fisheries put forth Coral Amendment 10, which was going to open up a section of the protected zone to the rock shrimp fishers to start trawling along the edge of the reef again. And if you've dealt with any of the currents down there, you know that the idea of controlled trawling along the edge of the reef is a joke. I mean, you know, they can't put the net down exactly the way they say they're going to put it down. Plus, they're putting up this huge plume of sediment that is going to clog the detrital feeding apparatus of the corals and kill anything that's left down there. And so there was a huge response. We only had 60 days comment period and got over 43,000 signatures to oppose this. But we're still very worried that this may actually happen. And so that's why we think it's really important that we get a wider audience aware of what is happening out there.
Yeah, so let me try to repeat what I believe I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you guys discover, not the two of you, but
Grant and John Reed.
Grant and John Reed discover what could be one of the best grouper and snapper spawning areas off the coast of Florida there is, and obviously just a very unique and special coral reef. It gets trawled by, let's just say, shrimp trawlers. A lot of it gets destroyed for obvious reasons, because that's what trawling does. It gets protected for a couple decades, which fixes part of the problem. Doesn't heal it all, but it fixes it. And now they want to open it up again.
That's it.
Same thing.
You got it.
You got it.
Okay. So what? Obviously, I think everyone listening is probably saying, "All right, there's got to be money involved or something." Like, right? What? I'm somewhat speechless, but what's happening? Why would anyone vote to say, yes, this is a good thing, considering what we're talking about, and having 45,000 people in a really short amount of time say this is a horrible idea? What are the, trying to put myself on in the judge's seat, where's the other party? What are they saying?
I think it should be obvious that council members shouldn't have a financial interest in what they're voting for. And one of the council members that voted for Amendment 10 is a part of the rock shrimp fishery. In fact, her father was known as the daddy of the rock shrimp fishery. He kind of started the fishery, and her family makes millions off the rock shrimp fishery. And you know, she obviously should not have been allowed to vote as part of the council. And there was a coral panel that opposed this adamantly and put forth lots of scientific data about why this was so damaging. And, you know, we just don't have a representative council that is looking at the interests of all the people and animals that are involved in this situation.
Is this a NOAA vote?
Yeah, it's NOAA Fisheries.
Okay. That's wild. So she's on the board of NOAA?
No, she's on the council.
Okay.
South Atlantic Fisheries Council.
God, okay.
And they do have a grouper snapper committee, and I don't understand that either, because these are extremely valuable to our grouper snapper fisheries, which actually are worth more than this rock shrimp fishery to more people.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So and we have other fisheries too. I mean, I've sat there in the submarine and watched amberjack come down and feed on the reef, and little tunny. And so there are a wide variety of pelagic fisheries that visit these reefs because they're out there next to the edge of the Gulf Stream. It's I-95 for fish, by the way. They can come down from Cape Cod on their way to Mexico and pass over these reefs. So I don't understand that decision at all. I mean, you have all these other fisheries that depend on the shelf edge coral reefs, and then you're going to cater to rock shrimp. You know, it just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it sounds like a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of situation.
Yeah, and you aren't thinking about the future of your shrimp fishery either, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like the devastation that would be done, it's, we mentioned it before, a short-term solution to a long-term problem. You get what you need out of it in the beginning, but, you know, to hell with what happens 10, 20 years down the road, or much later than that. You really, I don't know. I'm kind of like Joe. Like I'm trying to temper what I say, because I don't seem to understand in the big scheme of things how this is beneficial to anybody from a recreational standpoint, to the public. To what benefit would it serve us other than maybe a juicy rock shrimp at a couple of restaurants? I really struggle to see the benefit that this does for us as anglers, as lovers of any marine resource, offshore coral reefs, sharks, anything. I mean, this is dropping, potentially would lead, it'd be the equivalent of dropping a bomb on a, on somebody's home, on these fishes and these animals' homes. That, where are they going to go after that? I mean, you speak, Grant, like taking the submarine down there, aside from that stretch of 130 miles, how many other home options are there in the Atlantic? I mean, it is a giant sandy desert in many areas aside from that.
Well,
Correct.
from this reef is a slope going down, which is all sand and mud for the most part, until you get to the deeper corals, the Lophelia corals, which are down 1,000 feet or more. So it's a sand slope. You're really on an oasis there. I mean, there's no question about it. And it's right on the edge of the stream, which is an ecotone. If you hunt for weed lines when you're fishing at the surface, it's the same thing, except it's down there on the bottom.
And I mean, North Carolina, we've got a team member who is, I guess, still part of that lawsuit with CCA, and they're trying to get rid of all, I mean, gill nets and trawling. I mean, I think a lot of people see these shrimp boats, and not all, I'm not going to say every boat is doing this, but they see a lot of boats out there and assume, oh yeah, they're just down 30, 40 feet with their nets and they're in the middle of the water column. But I mean, what you described, Edie, and I wish to actually say that again, because I want to make sure everyone gets that, about what they do beforehand, right? This is not about taking net and hoping you don't hit the bottom, right? That'd be a whole different story if they were up 100 feet off the bottom
Right.
of the ocean floor, but they're
No,
going in and purposely destroying it to
Yes.
make sure their nets can get through and get every last shrimp there is.
They call it, they start out by creating what they call a goat trail. And they just drag the apparatus without the net attached, because the net would just be shredded by the coral.
Right.
So they just have the rollers and the doors to clear cut the bottom and create the rubble, which actually is decent habitat for rock shrimp by themselves. Although, as Grant correctly points out, you've just destroyed the food web. So you're ultimately destroying the shrimp fishery as well. But for the time being, while there's some of the coral around, then they can go in and just drag their nets across the rubble. And there is some evidence that since they've had the protections in place, that there is a little bit of coral coming back. It's very, very slow growing. Yeah. But they're going to undo that if they allow this bottom trawling and the sediment that's going to spew over the remaining reef. It's just going to do huge amounts of damage.
Yeah, and talk about you touched on earlier about, because I'm sure whoever on the other side is saying, well, hey, we're not going to really go in your area as much as you think. We're going to try to keep it right here. But talk about that when you're talking about hundreds of feet and the currents out there, how these, I mean, you said it, oh yeah, you can't really pinpoint it, but we're talking about sometimes these nets are going hundreds of feet in one way or the other, and you don't really know what you're hitting unless you were down there in a submarine and watching.
And they're vicious currents. I mean, Grant can attest to what it was like to try to dive the sub in those currents, right, Grant? You probably had some pretty hairy situations.
Well, we dropped the sub about a mile upstream in the current, so we'd hit the reef.
Wow.
That's just dropping 300 feet. I might add that the area was protected, but we still, and they weren't supposed to trawl in there, but we found evidence of them trawling. I found the netting and the doors and everything on the coral. So now maybe they were trying to stay out, but it hit the reef anyway. And that was recently, recently, in the last 10, 15 years, we saw that. And the controlling the nets and knowing that you're going to stay away from the coral, I think it's a very difficult thing. The other thing is, if you continue to disturb it, you're never going to have regeneration of the coral. Even if you think there's no coral there, it'll never regenerate. And so it's just need to leave it alone.
And one of their arguments for it is they claim that this is a historic fishery. It's 50 years old. It's not an historic fishery. It's a very young fishery.
Is about 100 years old.
Yeah.
But even so, why would that make it right?
It doesn't make it right. You're absolutely correct. But that was one of their leading arguments.
I think I could think of a bunch of old fishermen that fished for groupers and snappers a long time ago.
Yes.
That's your job to dig them up, Joe.
That's crazy. So where do we go from here? This is clearly a call to arms for, as I said, not just anglers who'd be pissed off that, I mean, potentially one of the best areas for grouper and snapper, but anyone who just cares about our oceans.
I just want a community that cares to at least be aware of it. I mean, John Reed and I wrote an op-ed, actually we wrote several op-eds about this when the 60-day notice came along, and we farmed it all over the place and nobody would publish it. It's not even on, it's not considered an area of interest for people.
You say it's not an area of interest for people, yet it's an area, habitat of area of particular concern.
That's what they call it. Yes.
That's literally what this is called. Oculina Bank is a habitat area of particular concern. And yet this discussion isn't of concern. Like, it's ironic.
The irony.
Here's a question I have for you, Joe, regarding CCA. Because I work with those guys off and on other issues inshore. And I sent them stuff on this time and again. I never got a reply. This is Florida CCA.
Yeah.
And I know that their habitat guy is, he's for protecting this reef, but we never got an official CCA Florida return on this. And so I'm wondering about the fishermen and how many fishermen are actually educated as to what we're talking about. So, this podcast is extremely important. And I'd like to see Florida fishers, particularly those along the East Coast here, not only East Coast, I know the Orlando Offshore Anglers Club comes down here and goes out to fish those areas all the time. And I don't know how many thousands of members they have. But I haven't heard word one from them. So,
you nailed it, Grant. It's an education. I don't know about CCA. We're not, partners with them, so I can't speak on their behalf. But it's education because Justin has fished that area for most of his life, and he knew about the reef in particular. But we didn't know about all this until that last podcast when Edie just happened to bring it up, and we're just like, whoa. So yeah, I think just most people have no idea, which is why as soon as I got that email, I was like, let's get you guys on the podcast and share this so we can get some people educated and hopefully a little bit riled up to write in. And I want to talk about that as kind of a next step. How can we help? Is it signing this petition? Is it writing into NOAA? What is the next step?
Well, writing into NOAA would be fine. The comment period just closed yesterday. Okay. And 60 days was not enough, but I think there is going to be another comment period, at which point we will definitely let you know and provide the information of who should be contacted. But NOAA Fisheries is where the buck stops. So you can reach out to them and let them know your thoughts on the subject. You guys are a big part of our commercial industry. What is it? The recreational fishing industry is like $9 billion or something. It's insane.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got a lot of clout. We just need to figure out how to use it to protect the fish.
Yeah, lack of better expression, unfortunately, broaden the net, broaden the bandwidth of who we can reach. Because when you dropped that nugget on the last podcast, it rung true to me personally, because I have been fortunate enough to enjoy not just the trifecta, but 4 different species of grouper throughout various legal areas to fish within Oculina. And I had no clue. 2 months ago when this was brought to my attention, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think that people have any concept. Central Florida offshore anglers, any offshore community out of Ponce Inlet, Port Canaveral, Sebastian Inlet, Fort Pierce, people that even come from Jupiter to run up and fish southern or western edges of the Oculina Bank in 160, 180 foot. All of this will be jeopardized, and people don't have any concept that this is going on. So this is the, like, put out the alarm. Let people know as soon as we have the opportunity to know what call to action can be done specifically. I think there would be an overwhelming amount of people that would want to voice their concern and opposition, because think about it. What would happen if in 15, 20 years, you can't enjoy gag grouper, scamp grouper, snapper, anything on the menu because a gigantic chunk of this fishery is no longer available, not even for recreational fishermen, but anybody that enjoys that. It goes well beyond just the recreational fishing sector. It goes to the public as well. It's just getting the word out in any way that we can.
As long as Red Lobster has shrimp in stock, we're fine.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. God forbid we don't have our rock shrimp at Red Lobster.
Yeah. Justin, where are you located?
I'm in Orlando.
Orlando.
So when I head out, I'll go to Port Canaveral, Sebastian Inlet, and it's a 20, 30 mile ride, but it is well worth it. It is a special fishery, and there's areas that are permitted and areas that are not permitted to the general public to fish. And in the areas that are permitted, it's incredible. I mean, 40, 50 pound gag grouper on lures, of all things. I mean, of all the places that I fished in Florida and the Southeast, that is the one place that I can say that I've done that. It's very, very special.
Yeah, they come up off the reef in groups. Gags. You're in Orlando. When I was doing this work and filming all this, I would go lecture to the Orlando Offshore Anglers group there. This is the late 70s, early to mid 80s. They gave me and my family tickets to Disney World so long as I gave this talk, okay? And of course, these guys saw the hundreds of groupers. They thought, oh my God. Well, here's the question for you. Speckled Hind, when was the last time you caught one of those?
I can't even tell you the last time I've seen one other than in the picture of a book.
Okay, yeah. And now we know the Warsaws. And by the way, I did this for the council. I did the profile, everything that ever been published on gags and Warsaws and everything. They lived to be over 100 years. Snowies and Warsaws, they've been put in a separate genus because we know they can go to 100 to 150 years of age. So that big Warsaw that was looking at me in the sphere, God knows how long he'd been out there, and to me, it's just, and he owned that reef. That was his reef, and the groupers, the gags, listen to this story. The female gags from the Carolinas migrate down to East Florida to spawn with the males. After they spawn, they go into inner shelf, and females all get together and determine who's going to change sex. They have their own hierarchies, and they have these colors that they produce when they're dominant females versus a female that's second or third in line. Once she changes to a male, which takes about a month or two, she's relegated to stay on the reef for the remainder of their lives. So those male gags stay there. The females come and in groups, harems, and mate. The females go back to the Carolinas. They come down and they go. And some of these females actually go into the Gulf, but the Gulf females never come around to the East Coast for some reason or another. And I mean, it's just so interesting. It's so complex. And it's a beautiful story, and the reef fits into that story as an intimate part of it where they actually spawn.
That right there brings attention to that it's not just a central East Coast of Florida concern. This is affecting people in multiple states throughout the Southeast.
Exactly. It will affect the Carolina gag fisheries. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
How many votes in this council?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know. The number 10 comes to mind, but I'm not sure that's right.
It'd be interesting to know. So wild. Yeah, this same thing happened, right, with the I don't remember what council it was, but for the Gulf snapper, right, where there was someone who had one of the big votes who had controlling interest in the commercial red snapper fishery. And it's like, well, of course they're going to vote for more days for the commercial and not for recreational. It's crazy that happens. I mean,
Well, it actually makes sense, though. I mean, people with money, get themselves into those positions because they can control, their.
Somebody's got to represent the fish, though.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be with the fish.
I think it should be you, Grant.
Grant. So is it even too late as we're recording this right now to even sign anything?
It is right now. Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So this is going to be about educating, getting people fired up. So when we have the next open opportunity that we can.
Because that 60 days wasn't enough time to have gotten 43,000 signatures in that amount of time was great. But, if there's another 60-day comment period, which several people think may happen, then we want to get a running start on that, because it just seems to me that given all of the scientific data that John Reed and others have been just sending during this comment period, it should just be open and shut. I can't even believe it, but I'm being told that I'm not generally part of advocacy like this, but I'm just over the top on this one.
You never thought you needed to be. You never in your wildest dreams thought that we needed to have some sort of call to action in such a short period of time. It's not like we're ready with battalions of people to just stand in opposition. We never even thought something like this was going to happen.
Right.
So of course it takes time to get the word out and get people involved. It's a scramble.
I was also just kind of shocked by the reaction on the op-eds. It's just not on anybody's radar. So it was dismissed. And so we clearly have to build up a groundswell.
Yep.
This is through my career, which is over 50 years now, been a problem of a marine scientist is you don't see what's below the surface. I mean, you throw your line, and I fish too, you throw your line out, you're looking across the surface. But my God, there are 1,000 groupers below you. Who knew? And so all this stuff is happening down there. And Edie's seen, she's had the giant squid, for Pete's sake, you see all these things. You see, my God, somebody's got to know about this.
That's why you got to write a book, Grant. I wrote one. Your turn.
I'm trying, but I get involved in these issues every once in a while. I can't keep my mouth shut.
Love it, guys. Well, I want to thank both of you for at least coming on here at a worst case and getting people educated. And I know you're going to continue to stay on this, as will we. And the second that you have any more information, let us know. I'm going to, in this blog post, if you're listening, I'm going to make sure that we put links at saltstrong.com in the actual show notes, essentially, where you can read about this and get a little bit more information and see some of the things that you guys have documented. It is just, you just kind of want to scratch your head and say, how the heck are we even here talking about this?
Yep. So
we hope smart heads will prevail in this, but just in case, we'll be ready with some firepower, if you will. And the second that about any other open opportunities to raise our voice and shoot some emails, let us know.
We really appreciate that.
Thanks,
absolutely. Joe. Any other place for a listener to go learn more? Is there any even websites dedicated to this, or is it?
Well, I sent you a package of stuff. I think there were links in that.
Okay, I'll check those links then too. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Edie, Grant, thank you guys.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
It was a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more stories. We'll have to have you guys on again.
Fish stories.
Grant and I got lots of sea stories.
Well, that's how you learn. Yeah, you certainly could be one of the best anglers in the world, right? I mean, that's we did a whole course about just what really does happen underwater, how fish are positioned, right? A lot of, like you said, you have no idea how many grouper have sat there and laughed at your bait down there, and why did this one hit it? You know, why did one attack it? And it took forever to film the thing. As you know, fish seem to act differently when all of a sudden you bring lights and cameras underwater. But you can learn so much by going underwater, whether you're a scuba diver and lucky enough to be in a little submarine like that. It's really, really fascinating.
They don't take lights with sand tiger sharks at night. They eat your light.
Oh, wow.
That's another
Good tip.
story.
Good tip,
That's
Greg.
all North Carolina too. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
If you're listening, make sure to go to saltstrong.com. In the fishing tips section on this blog post, we will have the links and a couple of the documents as well for you to learn more. So thank you all so much. I appreciate you, and we'll talk on the next episode.
Right.